So I decided to do a video on gun and drug prohibition, but to cover all the major topics, that video would have easily been beyond 30 minutes in length. So what I decided was that I'd break up the major categories into parts and upload them topic by topic. The first one, of course, will be the most important, because it would render all other points null and void. By prohibition, I refer to a full-on ban of firearms applied to a nation indiscriminate of age, mental health, or criminal record. Now understand my position. I don't place any value in your supposed rights or liberties or constitution, nor do I place stake in the concept of freedom or security. Everyone enters the gun prohibition and drug prohibition debates with some sort of agenda. Normally what I see happen is that someone wanting to be anti-gun will enter the argument on the anti-gun side, and will search for statistics that support their position, and deliberately discard or conceal statistics that don't benefit their point. I see both sides do this, so that's one of the major problems that I'll talk about in a later video. People select their own gun statistics and essentially manufacture their own facts for the agenda of supporting their side. The goal isn't to examine it rationally, it's to attempt to prove what they'd like to be true, even if done maliciously or deceptively. Let me tell you what my agenda is. I want to build a nation capable of perpetual survival while perpetually thriving. A more short-term goal would be making one capable of thriving for 500 years. This nation needs to be able to defend against external threats, obtain needed resources, maintain a dependable standard of living for its people, and also defend against internal threats such as corruption. This is the agenda that I enter the prohibition debates with. By examination of the prohibition debate, when it comes to firearms, having my agenda, I've been left with an undisputed argument against gun prohibition, and it's so important that I have to talk about it first, because, on its own, it's capable of swaying my opinion regardless of other categories, and I'm admittedly curious if someone can present a workable counter-argument. The first part of this issue is the concept of long-term results. In order to enforce a full firearm ban, you create two classes of citizen. Those with weapon-carrying rights, Class A, comprised of police, military, and government, then Class B, the average citizen, whom is not allowed these privileges. There is no practical way to get around this, because in order to enforce the law, the enforcers require being armed, both from internal threat and external. If both Class A and Class B were totally disarmed, threat could arise from a neighboring nation, as well as a massive risk to those informed that their crimes are unpunishable due to the rules being unenforceable. So this scenario is inevitable. You can't actually prohibit guns, you can only limit who gets them to Class A being armed and not Class B. Now, assuming you do not believe in any form of, or risk of, government oppression or police brutality, either because you don't believe it exists or for some reason believe that it can never exist in your nation of residence, you're still left with another issue, the cultural issue. In order to rationalize that Class B cannot be entrusted with firearms, you have to make the argument that the average member of Class B cannot utilize these firearms properly, whereas Class A is capable. By doing so, you've established an acceptable standard of behavior, or more specifically of failure, for the average member of Class B. Suppose you're at a school shooting where a small handful of adults and children were shot. The scenario where the adults would move to engage the shooter would be something the average Class B citizen is expected not to do. Not just be unlikely to attempt, but actually expected to avoid. This means that the desirable response from a member of Class B to an incident is to panic and flee the scene, not to participate in halting the incident, because to rationalize that Class B is unfit for a combat scenario infers that they lack the mental capacity or responsibility with which to do more good than harm. So the expected behavior from a teacher would be to flee the scene, leaving the children behind. Attempting to evacuate the children and not look out for one's own needs indicates placing oneself at personal risk to mitigate the incident or potentially halt it, which would not be considered acceptable for a Class B. Therefore, the acceptable response is to flee and allow the children to fend for themselves, regardless of casualty rate. So my issue with it is this. If you are in favor of gun prohibition, do you truly understand what kind of society you're really asking for? By placing the expectation that a Class B citizen will not attempt to halt the incident or mitigate it, you've established an acceptable, and also expected, level of failure from the average Class B person. An acceptable and expected level of failure is harmful to the nation's long-term ability to fight against threats, both external as well as internal. A Class B citizenry that is expected to behave in this manner, after a few generations, will begin to lack mental faculties, such as the ability to act when pressured, or make serious decisions under pressure. This type of citizenry, historically speaking, is one that would be considered regressing, not progressing. So let's call this place Nation A. Nation A has a citizenry that has embraced expected levels of failure that are set, in my opinion, particularly low. Now we could then stack this up against a nation whose citizenry, for example, trains each citizen to act under pressure as part of their high school education, and doesn't depend on firearm prohibition. The concept would be that should an incident develop, all persons present are field conscripted and expected to participate in nullifying the threat. Let's call this Nation B. I don't believe Nation A can win against Nation B, either in a financial war, a cultural war, or a hot war. The citizenry that had embraced a standard of failure rather than one of forward progress will have reduced ability compared to Nation B's enhanced ability. Since Nation A also lacked the ability to fight against any level of Class A corruption, there's also risk that other handicaps would have developed beforehand as well. The citizenry of Nation A has essentially been de-weaponized and made to be, to put it bluntly, more pathetic than those of Nation B. Because of this, I don't perceive the concept of gun prohibition to be healthy for a nation's long-term survival if I want the nation to thrive and maintain an ability to fight against external and internal threats. Even if Nation A has lower crime rates and fewer violent incidents than Nation B will still win should these nations clash in any way, be it financial, cultural, or militarily. That's not to say that by adopting gun prohibition the nation is condemned to a horrid fate. There are many other factors from different subjects that may provide benefits, and these other benefits may outweigh the costs associated with gun prohibition, but gun prohibition is a negative trait, therefore I question its place in a society. I believe that obtaining the scenario of Nation B's citizenry is doable simply because it's been doable in the past for other nations, where the circumstance of pandemonium without prohibition did not take place. I believe concepts of fear and panic when entered into a pressure situation can be educated out of people with proper training and education. As someone who's been placed in a situation where the probable result was death, I can tell you from personal experience that behaving like the described Class B of Nation A would likely have resulted in my death. It's difficult for someone like me to perceive cowardice, panic, and causation of chaos to be anything other than the result of lack of education, experience, and training. In the present-day society in which I live, the current United States, victimization seems to be learned during one's adolescence, not so much personal responsibility. Had I behaved like the average person is expected to behave, that behavior would likely have cost me my life. Therefore I rationalize that this behavior is hazardous, and that the alternative, training people to act under pressure as part of education, is a preferable outcome. And that is the main reason why I'm against gun prohibition. It's a mix of historical reference and my personal observations and experiences, combined with my goal for the long-term future of the civilization. I don't perceive it as capable of assisting a nation reach the long-term goals that I've set. I only see it as capable of doing more harm than good. Therefore, even if other factors are capable of outproducing its flaws, I have to be against it, because I perceive it as unnecessary weight. I intend to make another video about crime rates in general, as well as education and drug use, but on the topic of gun prohibition, and really prohibition in general, I don't see it as helpful because it establishes an expectation of irresponsibility, and I don't think that's a helpful or desirable outcome if I want to make a nation capable of meeting the standards of survival that I've set. Anyway, leave a comment and do attempt to dispute my argument if you so desire. I'll see you next time.